Good morning. Thanks
Morning,
for
Neil.
joining us today. As a starting point, can you tell us a bit about yourself and what you do, please?
Absolutely. So my name is Aurore. I originally studied in Paris, in business school, and then decided to move to London. I hadn't had a chance to work or live abroad, so decided to move to London and work in finance. So I joined UBS in M&A, and I was at UBS for 12 years, and joined the TMT team. So I started working and advising telecom, media, and tech clients, doing all sorts of different transactions from buy side, sell side, IPOs, big M&A financings as well, and also work with a few media and tech clients. And essentially, after 12 years or 14 years at UBS, I had 2 children, decided not to go back to banking. I sort of lifted my head off the sand a little bit and looked at potentially working in impact and sustainability. So I did a sustainability course with Cambridge University, and eventually joined an impact fund which is focused on food and agriculture. And I was an investment director in that fund, doing investments in growth equity, both in between venture capital and private equity for 5 years. And I recently left the fund, so I'm looking for the next opportunity.
Were you super ambitious growing up? Because that career path of investment banking isn't for everyone, and I guess the assumption is that it's going to be a hard few years when you first go into it. So is that something that you kind of had your mind on very, very early?
It's a good question. I think I was lucky because my parents were very focused on the academics. My dad is a banker, my mom is a lawyer, so I did study finance and law as well to try and make them both happy. Eventually decided that finance was more something that I enjoyed, and I was very curious about companies, how companies grow, become profitable, and make a difference, make an impact. Hence, I decided to go into finance, and I think I thought I was always curious to see how I would evolve, or I would challenge myself to live somewhere else, learn English as well, which wasn't necessarily taught very well in France at the time. And in 2004, when I arrived in London, you had many Europeans that wanted to work in finance. London was the place to go. Banks were hiring a lot of graduates from European universities, so it was a sort of natural step for me. And then, I guess I've always liked to be challenged a little bit, and as much as it's not easy every day to just step out of your comfort zone and join an environment which was demanding, but I knew it was going to be a good school as well.
Excellent. Sorry.
And what, I guess, for the average person, there's a lot of preconceptions, I think, about investment banking, and then maybe we can come on to private equity. What do you think about those things, and what's the reality?
Okay, well, first I have to say I left investment banking about 6-7 years ago, and I'm sure things have evolved tremendously over the last 6-7 years due to the new generations, the change of leadership, etc. I think the preconception, which might not necessarily be the case, or at least it wasn't my experience, was that it's very demanding. You're especially when you start as an analyst, you're essentially just being used and spend your days in front of Excel and in front of documents, but you don't days and nights, and you have to make lots of sacrifices, and it's not necessarily a very flourishing environment where people thrive. I personally didn't have that experience, and I think that it's probably why I stayed for that long. I think I really enjoy those years because, as I said, it's a great school, and if you're lucky enough to work with the right people and the right leaders who value and respect your work, obviously you're dependent on the clients, and it's a very competitive industry, so you have to deliver, and sometimes for yesterday. So it requires a lot of hard work, a lot of hours during the nights. But again, if you work with the right people who know where they're going, who have a sense of direction and who are successful, it's a very good school. So I was very lucky in the TMT team to work with really good bankers, very consistent team as well, which I think makes a big difference because clients come back to you, they know exactly who they're getting, who is advising them, and that the delivery is high quality and consistent. So I think I had a great experience, and I know a lot of people who've been burnt because they didn't work in the right team, they didn't work with the right people, and I think that has led me to also think that everywhere you go is all driven by people, and not so much the type of work itself, but more the reason why you do it and what you learn from it as well.
And what's the best piece of advice you got when you were in banking?
I think it's to. Well, I got given a lot of advices, but I think it's mostly to try and be as curious as possible about the project you work with, that you work on, about the people you work with, about the client, and that will bring you opportunities. So when you're an analyst and you work all day and all night on a presentation, you can just stay within the sort of boundaries of that presentation, or you can sort of reach out to other people to try and understand things you're not getting. You can call the client as well when you work on a project and try and understand better, again, things you don't understand. That makes you work better, but also creates a relationship and a bond with the client, which tomorrow will be helpful for you in your career. So I think it's to always try and step out the work that you're being given to learn and eventually become a sort of more well-rounded individual, well-rounded banker, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And then obviously, sort of 6-7 years ago, you moved into private equity. Why was that, and how do you balance purpose and investing?
So as I said, when I left UBS, I obviously had a bit of time to reflect and think, what do I want to do next? And I had worked with quite a few private equity clients, so I had a sense of what the investing job was, and very different from what I was doing in M&A, because in M&A you're basically you're working on a project, but you're not necessarily initiating or originating the project, and you're definitely not looking at the project once the acquisition has been made. So it's a really short stint within the lifetime or the cycle of the project or the investments. Whereas I knew that by going into investing, you would have a bit more control, full control of the strategy, the rationale for doing it, and obviously managing that investment post acquisition. So the operational part was also going to be much more interesting and deep than what you see in M&A. So hence I started looking into working on the buy side, but I also wanted to find an industry where the investments we were making were sort of moving the needle a little bit, making an impact. When I was at UBS, I was working very long hours and didn't necessarily had grasp of what was happening in the world and how recycling was important or buying local food was important. Hence, when I came across Cibus, where I was working for 5 years, I thought that the purpose of investing in food and ag companies, where you make an impact on helping them grow and adopt new technologies, new products or services that really help them produce better, save resources, increase yield, produce better foods, was an interesting way for me to combine all the analytical skills that I had learned at UBS with the sense of trying to make a difference from where I was sitting in that new career.
Listening to you sort of describe the differences, it feels like you were I'd describe it more as a transactor in investment banking, and I feel like you've become more of a holistic business person in your most recent role. Would you recommend that path to people, to sort of come away from the sort of the investment banking world and then go out into maybe more the real world, experience business, get more involved in almost operating a business, I guess? It sounds like it's been really good rounding for yourself.
Yeah, I do recommend it. It's different skills, because in investment banking you're managing a project. You obviously have a lot of analytical financial skills, and you need to become a bit more strategic as you grow in the industry, because you sort of need to go and speak to all those companies, speak about their strategy, and same with funds as well. So, but it's very transactional, as you said. Whereas when you go into the world of investing, you have to be much more strategic, much more operational, and the hard work starts once you've made the investment, not so much during that first phase. Obviously, originating and finding the investment is hard, but this is something you do through developing your strategy and knowing where you want to position yourself. Then there's indeed the sort of project management phase, but then once you've made the acquisition, especially if it's a majority stake where you have a strong sort of influence on the strategy, and you constantly on a weekly basis work with management to develop that strategy, it's a completely different sort of job, and it requires different skills. But you see a lot of bankers or a lot of strategy consultants who have sort of mastered those skills, who then want to move into investing because they want to be able to apply those skills and apply all the strategy they've developed for their clients for their own investments, if it makes sense. So you suddenly have put a different hat on, think about how to create value, how to build the right management team, what strategy makes more sense for the company given their sort of stage of growth and given the competitive and regulatory environment. So it's a different job, but I think it enables you to have a much more, as you said, much more comprehensive and wider approach to a company than just working on one project at a time.
Great. And obviously you've enjoyed a bit of a break now, had some time to. What are the benefits of having some time out after a busy career to date?
Yeah, I think I always, and obviously talking to a lot of finance or any professionals, really, I think there is there is a clear benefit in sometimes being able to take a step back and reflect, on what you've just been doing, what you've enjoyed, what you haven't enjoyed, what you've learned from mistakes, and where do you want to go next. So there's people that go and travel, there's people that basically upskill and try and do a course or an MBA to sort of pivot and redefine their career. I think a career is not linear, and you go through ups and downs. And I think having a bit of time off to reflect is really helpful. So first time I had some time off I was on maternity leave, but then I took a bit of time when the kids were slightly older, out of the baby phase, and I did that course with Cambridge University, as I said, on sustainability, and I think it was a great way to just get the fundamentals on sustainability, how it impacts government policies, corporate strategies, and the overall environment, I think, in terms of consumer as well, and how all of this links together, and you can find new solutions, new products. So I think I was clearly drawn to working in impact after that, and so that really helped me. And I think I'm going through that phase, as you said. I've been away for 2 months now, but I'm in that period of reflection as to where do I go next.
Excellent. It sounds like you one of your reflections has been on the importance of kind of great leaders, having good people around you. What have you learnt about leadership in general? Like, what's the type of leader that you are and want to be, knowing the sort of the lessons you've learnt from others? You don't need to be specific about the bad ones, by the way.
Leadership is an interesting question. I think some people would describe this. They would say there's two types of leadership: leadership with fear, or leadership with sort of respect and admiration. But I think actually there's as many leadership types as there are people. It's more trying to find people that you respect and admire, and you want to that basically carry you to your next level and help you thrive. So for me, over the years, I think I've sort of summed it up in my mind as 5 qualities that you sort of need to show to be a good leader. One is resilience. The other one is communication. I think it's really important to just have transparency, communicate with your team, and make sure that everybody understands where you're going. I think it's decisiveness as well, being able to take decisions at the right time, having listened to people, but showing the way and showing a strategy so that people can follow you and know where they're going. And I think it's also about delegating, or basically giving ownership to people so that they feel that they're not just a soldier, but they're also participating to the project, to the journey. And so giving a sense of ownership, I think, is important. And finally, I think it's about being trustworthy. So doing what you say you're going to do, and knowing that people will trust you and will trust that you empower them for the right reason, and they will be rewarded, and you'll carry on the journey together. So it's these are for me the key qualities that you need to have. And I'm not going to pretend I have all of them, but I think it's important to keep that in mind when you work with people on a daily basis.
Yeah. What's the biggest challenge you've had to overcome so far?
I think I think the challenge is about adapting. to different environments, different people, and changes as well in the environment. So it's, as I said, nothing is linear, and I think even when you think you're working with excellent people and you're learning a lot and you have a great project, well, the project ends and then you have to adapt to a different project working with other people. And so it's, M&A is project driven, and then in investment, in private equity, it's company driven, but you work on many different companies before finding one investment. And you work on different projects, and some of them are successful, some of them are not. So it's about adapting all the time to those projects, those sectors, those companies. I'm not saying it's a difficult task, but I think it's a challenge on a daily basis, because you might know everything about aquaculture, but then suddenly you have to work on a robotic project, and you feel like you're starting from scratch again. And so it's basically having a growth mindset where you know that you're being challenged, but you take it as a positive challenge to learn, and then to become a better financial individual or better professional.
Yeah. We speak to a lot of people who want to work in private equity but haven't come from that background, haven't necessarily come from investment, maybe more of a corporate background, and have an interest in moving to private equity. It's a question that comes up all the time. So growth mindset you mentioned. What do you think the other qualities that someone needs if they're trying to make that transition into a private equity environment, either in a portfolio company or on the investor side?
I think it's, essentially it's about being curious, which, I guess can be the same as having a growth mindset, but it's really wanting to understand where it makes sense to invest. And so for that, you select one sector and you're saying, well, I'm going to do as much research as I can, and I'm going to meet as many people as I can to understand whether it's the right area to invest in according to my criteria. So your criteria could be, returns on investment. It could be, making an impact. It could be for the short term. It could be for the longer term. So depending on the criteria you have, where does it make sense to invest? And so once you've selected the sector, you sort of need to have some financial analytical skills, some people skills as well, to really deep dive into that sector and understand the growth drivers, the ecosystems, who are the incumbents, who are the new players, what could potentially disrupt that sector going forward, how do you make money in that sector, do you need to invest a lot, is it capex heavy or not, and eventually decides, this could be the right investment because I really believe that company has the right management team, the right strategy, and they're very well positioned. So I think it's about being very curious and not leaving any stones unturned once you look at a sector and a single company as a potential investment. And I think from what I've seen, we have a lot of bankers or even strategy consultants that come in that add different skills, but having a mix of both I think is great. And you need soft skills. I think it's probably the one area where private equity has probably been or underestimated how important soft skills are. And I think the great investors have soft skills. They can identify the right team, build the right team, and partner with the right people because they have that ability to bond with people and really grasp who is good at what and where it makes sense to position them.
You've done your sustainability kind of course that you mentioned, as well as obviously sitting in purpose-led private equity. I'm really interested to know what role you think the private sector or private equity specifically will have in driving ESG, and whether you think there's any kind of conflicts there around, profit with purpose and all that good stuff. I don't know if you can just bring that to life for us a bit. What role do you think purpose-led private equity has in driving the transition that we need?
Yeah, it's interesting. Look, when I started in private equity, I think ESG was less of a buzz. Sort of 6-7 years ago. It was definitely starting, but it was less of a buzz, and you clearly had a divide between impact funds and normal private equity funds. Divide meaning they were not looking at the same returns, and they were not looking at the same duration of investments either. And you had private equity that were looking at 20% plus annual return. Impact funds were more in the camp of between 5 and 15%, depending on their targets. And the reason why there was that divide is because people were saying, well, if you invest in impact, you shouldn't be looking at the money aspect of things, but you should be looking at all the other factors that are actually making an impact through your investments. I think this is not the case anymore. I think we've seen that companies that invest in their people, that invest in the social aspect, the governance aspect, and obviously the environment and controlling their sort of carbon footprint and supply chain, were in the end more sustainable than other businesses, which means it creates more value in the long term. And I genuinely believe that. So in the fund I was working in, we were looking at private equity returns, but we didn't feel that it was, against making the right impacts and investing in the right companies. So I think the two can go together, but it's about taking the right steps to really go towards a more sustainable strategy and making the right investments as well. It's about having a sort of medium-term view on the investments that you make, and it's not going to happen overnight. Changing the way you think about your supply chain is complex. Changing the way you govern the company is complex as well. So things are not happening necessarily over 6 months, but I genuinely believe that by making the right steps, you're making your company more sustainable and therefore create more value.
Yeah. And I guess on that sort of holistic level, like, I guess having looked at economics more broadly, you probably believe that the private sector really is going to have to be the driving force, or do you believe that government and policymakers have an equal role? Where do you think the sort of key, who's going to drive this forward to where we need to get to? It's a big question, that. I know.
Yeah, it's a big question. I think it's a combination of things. Yeah. We've seen changes being driven by obviously companies and banks with the right financing. So ESG target financing, for instance, green bond or even blue bonds now linked to the investment in aquaculture and the sea. Mm-hmm. So banks or financial institutions in general have a big role to play. Corporates have a big role to play. And I think, through previous investments that I've made, you can see that the regulatory environment and obviously governments and have a big role to play as well to try and fast track some of the laws and regulatory push to promote some products. So in food and ag, for instance, the fund I was working with is focused on food and agriculture and investing in technologies, solutions, products that really help the sector. And so we see a lot of products, either food products or soil inputs, that need to be authorized by the regulator, and the more regulatory sort of barriers there are, the slower it is for those products to come to market and eventually be adopted. So I think everybody has a role to play, and yeah, there's a lot of money in impact investments today, and I think both on the VC and private equity side, there's clearly a very, very big push towards impact, climate tech, agri-tech, and obviously deep tech as well. But from an impact perspective, I think more and more funds are focused on that aspect.
What do you see the next sort of 6 to 12 months looking like? We obviously had a period of lower deals happening in recent years compared to previous years, although that seems to be picking up a little bit now, and the exits just haven't been happening as we know. And then we've got a new government, a budget coming in a few weeks that I think a lot of people in private equity are and broaden that a bit concerned about. What are your thoughts?
I think the outlook is better than it was 6 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
I think you rightly pointed out there's a lot of money in the private equity and VC sector and dry powder to be invested. There's a lot of exits that need to happen as well that didn't happen in the last 3 or 4 years because of valuation and very high interest rates as well. Probably more exits will happen through M&A. So big corporates being able to borrow again or having cleaned their balance sheet, we will be able to buy those smaller growing companies more than IPOs. I think the IPO market has been obviously sort of in existence for the last 2 years, but will probably take time to recover. So a lot of deals in, I think, quite a lot of different sectors. So a lot of my colleagues or friends are gearing up towards a very, very active end of 2024 and probably active 25 as well. Interest rate coming down as well will help. So I think it's going to be an interesting one. The one thing I would say is obviously AI is big on everybody's agenda. So we see a lot of deals around AI, and Europe is probably going to be very dynamic and active in that space. Obviously, we've seen the Draghi report about a week ago about how Europe needs to be invest more into its companies and invest more into entrepreneurs to really fast track the growth and not fall behind the US or the other countries. But I think there's a lot of interesting initiatives and companies in Europe, in AI in particular, which makes it interesting to evolve in Europe.
And we were talking earlier, you've got first-hand sort of experience that people are going to leave the UK based on sort of recent or upcoming decisions, including entrepreneurs. That's not a good thing, is it?
Look, I'm not gonna go into any political discussions, but yeah, I mean, I have a few of my private equity friends or good entrepreneurs with successful companies that I have settled in the UK a few years back because the UK was attractive. Obviously all the infrastructure and all the talent that you could benefit from in the UK was a good reason for them to come and start their company or grow their company in the UK. Obviously, the tax environment changing is probably, forcing people to consider whether it's a good thing to stay in the UK or not. So there might be some sort of exodus to some other countries in Europe, which probably has started to happen already. But we'll see how things are happening and what the budget is going to bring in October.
Yeah, fine.
Anything else that I think we said you've got a young family. I'm always really interested to know what is a really, really tough career. Like, how do you kind of manage to have it all, right? Young family, high quality job. How do you balance it all personally?
Look, I don't think there's a magic answer. I think it's whatever works for everyone. I have two young children, but I have a good support system as well. So good nanny and good grandparents as well who look after the kids when need be. And it's also knowing what works for you. I mean, some people. So I know some women who have 5-6 kids and work full time, and they make it work as well. I only have 2 children, so there's no reason for me not to make it work. But it's finding the right balance for yourself. So I did actually work part time for a little while because I knew the children were really young, and that gave me the peace of mind that I could, be there for a few hours a week to get to know them better as well, and support them any way I can, and go back and forth to all the different activities. So I did that, and I knew that was the right balance for me. But I think everybody can find their balance. But having a good support system, I think, is really helpful, especially given how many holidays children have every year.
Yeah, and I guess finding the right employer as well to back that up. Lot of businesses, particularly financial services now, and others as well, going back to 4 or 5 days in the office from where we've come from COVID. What do you think about that?
Yeah, look, different companies have different policy. We've seen, Goldman Sachs want their employee in the office almost 5 days a week. Other companies are much more flexible. I think it really depends on the culture of the team, the culture of the leader. I was actually pre-COVID, I was working part-time and 2 days a week at home, 2 days a week in the office. I knew it was the right balance for me, and this was how the team was operating, so it was working really well. I think it's important to go to the office, personally, because you form a bond and you just have a different atmosphere, different way of engaging with people as well when you're in the office versus on video. So I really value being in the office and meeting your colleagues and actually networking in general, not just your colleagues, but people you would not necessarily speak to if you're at home on video, because you're not going to call them, or you would feel it's weird, whereas you could bump into them in the office and then suddenly you create a bond that way. So I think it's important to be in the office. I think every team has to find the right balance. I don't believe that people at home are necessarily slacking. I don't believe people in the office are necessarily working either. So it's finding the right model, but I think it's compared to when I started work 20 years ago, I think having the flexibility to work from home 1 or 2 days, not commute, save the time and do something else with that time, go to the gym, spend time with your kids, is the right evolution from my standpoint.
A final question from me as well. What do you do to kind of, we talked about resilience earlier, what do you do to sort of build that resilience? Lots of people do, sports and things like that. Is there anything that you use to manage your own stress and kind of create that resilience in your own life?
So I do cold water swimming.
Wow.
And anytime I have a tough situation or something where, which brings a lot of nervousness and stress, I always think, well, it's never going to be as tough as, jumping in water when it's 2 degrees. So that sort of helped me. I discovered that in the UK, actually. Never did that in France, but I live in Hampstead and I go and swim in the Lido.
Nice.
And it's it's basically non-heated, so you have the water is at sort of outdoor temperature. So it gets very very cold in the winter. It's nice in the summer. So in the winter you have way less people in the pool. Yeah. But I guess that helps. I think it's about knowing yourself as well, knowing what are the ways you can manage stress, and be true to your identity as well. So whenever you have a stressful situation, just if you're grounded and you know who you are, I think you sort of manage it better, I would say.
Brilliant. I think that's a nice way to finish today. But
great.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Neil. Thanks, Rory.
Really interesting insights, and we hope to speak to you soon.
Great.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.